Oh, hey, didn't see you there. I was just about to read chapter 11 of All About Love to myself out loud. But you can listen, yes. Love you guys. Chapter 11 Loss, Loving into Life and Death. You have to trust that every friendship has no end, that a communion of saints exists among all those, living and dead, who have truly loved God and one another. You know from experience how real this is. Those you have loved deeply and who have died live on in you, not just as memories, but as real presences. Henry Nouwen. Here we go. Love makes us feel more alive. Living in a state of lovelessness, we feel we might as well be dead. Everything within us is silent and still. We are unmoved. Soul murder is the term psychoanalysts use to describe the state of living death. It echoes the biblical declaration that anyone who does not know love is still in death. Cultures of domination court death. Hence the ongoing fascination with violence, the false insistence that it is natural for the strong to prey upon the weak, for the more powerful to prey upon the powerless. In our culture, the worship of death is so intense it stands in the way of love. On his deathbed, Erich Fromm asked a beloved friend why we prefer love of death to the love of life, why the human race prefers necrophilia to biophilia. Coming from Fromm, this question was merely rhetorical, as he had spent his life explaining our cultural failure to embrace the reality that love gives life meaning. Unlike love, death will touch us all at some point in our lives. We will witness the death of others, or we will witness our own dying, even if it's just in that brief instance when life is fading away. Living with lovelessness is not a problem we openly and readily complain about, yet the reality that we will all die generates tremendous concern, fear, and worry. It may very well be that the worship of death, indicated by the constant spectacles of dying we watch on television screens daily, is one way our culture tries to still that fear, to conquer it, to make us comfortable. Writing about the meaning of death in contemporary culture, Thomas Merton explains, psychoanalysis has taught us something about the death wish that pervades the modern world. We discover our affluent society to be profoundly addicted to the love of death. In such a society, though much may officially be said about human values, whenever there is, in fact, a choice between the living and the dead, between men and money, or men and power, or men and bombs, the choice will always be for death. For death is the end or the goal of life. Our cultural obsession with death consumes energy that could be given to the art of loving. The worship of death is a central component of patriarchal thinking, whether expressed by women or men. Visionary theologians see the failure of religion as one reason our culture remains death-centered. In his work, Original Blessing, Matthew Fox explains, Western civilization has preferred love of death to love of life to the very extent that its religious traditions have preferred redemption to creation, sin to ecstasy, and individual introspection to cosmic awareness and appreciation. For the most part, patriarchal perspectives have shaped religious teaching and practice. Recently, there has been a turning away from these teachings toward a creation-grounded spirituality that is life-affirming. Fox calls this the via positiva. Without this solid grounding in creation's powers, we become bored, violent people. We become necrophiliacs in love with death and the powers and principalities of death. We move away from this worship of death by challenging patriarchy, creating peace, working for justice, and embracing a love ethic. Ironically, the worship of death as a strategy for coping with our underlying fear of death's power does not truly give us solace. It is deeply anxiety-producing. The more we watch spectacles of meaningless death, of random violence and cruelty, the more afraid we become in our daily lives. We cannot embrace the stranger with love, for we fear the stranger. We believe the stranger is a messenger of death who wants our life. This irrational fear is an expression of madness if we think of madness as meaning we are out of touch with reality. Even though we are more likely to be hurt by someone we know than a stranger, our fear is directed toward the unknown and the unfamiliar. That fear brings with it intense paranoia and a constant obsession with safety. The growing number of gated communities in our nation is but one example of the obsession with safety. With guards at the gate, individuals still have bars and elaborate security systems. Americans spend more than $30 billion a year on security. When I have stayed with friends in these communities and inquired as to whether all the security is in response to an actual danger, I am told not really, that it is the fear of threat rather than a real threat that is the catalyst for an obsession with safety that borders on madness. Culturally, we bear witness to this madness every day. We can all tell endless stories of how it makes itself known in everyday life. For example, an adult white male answers the door when a young Asian male rings the bell. We live in a culture where, without responding to any gesture of aggression or hostility on the part of the stranger who is simply lost in trying to find the correct address, the white male shoots him, believing he is protecting his life and his property. This is an everyday example of madness. The person who is really the threat here is the homeowner who has been so well socialized by the thinking of white supremacy, of capitalism, of patriarchy, that he can no longer respond rationally. White supremacy has taught him that all people of color are threats irrespective of their behavior. Capitalism has taught him that at all costs his property can and must be protected. Patriarchy has taught him that his masculinity has to be proved by the willingness to conquer fear through aggression, that it would be unmanly to ask questions before taking action. Mass media then brings us the news of this in a newspeak manner that sounds almost jocular and celebratory, as though no tragedy has happened, as though the sacrifice of a young life was necessary to uphold property values and white patriarchal honor. Viewers are encouraged to feel sympathy for the white male homeowner who made a mistake. The fact that this mistake led to the violent death of an innocent young man does not register. The narrative is worded in a manner that encourages viewers to identify with the one who made the mistake by doing what we are led to feel we might all do, to protect our property at all costs from any sense of perceived threat. This is what the worship of death looks like. All the worship of death we see on our television screens, all the death we witness daily, does not prepare us in any way to face dying with awareness, clarity, or peace of mind. When worship of death is rooted in fear, it does not enable us to live fully or well. Merton contends if we become obsessed with the idea of death hiding and waiting for us in an ambush, we are not making death more real, but life less real. Our life is divided against itself. It becomes a tug of war between the love and the fear of itself. Death then operates in the midst of life, not at the end of life, but rather as the fear of life. To live fully, we need to let go of our fear of dying. That fear can only be addressed by the love of the living. We have a long history in this nation of believing that to be too celebratory is dangerous, that being optimistic is foolhardy, hence our difficulty in embracing life, in teaching our children and ourselves how to love life. Many of us come to love life only when faced with life-threatening illness. Certainly, facing the possibility of my own death gave me the courage to confront the lack of love in my life. Much contemporary visionary work on death and dying has highlighted learning how to love. Loving makes it possible for us to change our worship of death to a celebration of life. In an unsent letter written to a true love in my life, I wrote, during the memorial service for her sister, my friend gave testimony in which she declared, "Death has left us loving her completely." We are so much more able to embrace the loss of intimate loved ones and friends when we know that we have given our all, when we have shared with them that mutual recognition and belonging and love which death can never change or take away. Each day I am grateful for having known a love that enables me to embrace death with no fear of incompleteness or lack, with no sense of irredeemable regret. That is a gift you gave. I cherish it. Nothing changes its value. It remains precious. Loving does this. Love empowers us to live fully and die well. Death becomes then not an end to a life, but part of living. In her autobiography, The Wheel of Life, published shortly after her death, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross tells the story of her awakening to the realization that we can face death without fear. In these earliest days of what would become known as the birth of thanatology, or the study of death, my greatest teacher was a black cleaning woman. I do not remember her name, but what drew my attention to her was the effect she had on many of us, of the most seriously ill patients. Each time she left their rooms, there was, I noticed, a tangible difference in their attitudes. I wanted to know her secret. Desperately curious, I literally spied on this woman who had never finished high school, but knew a big secret. The secret was that this wise black woman knew, which Kubler-Ross positively appropriated, was that we must befriend death and let it be our guide in life, meeting it unafraid. When the black cleaning lady, who had triumphed over many hardships in her own life, who had lost loved ones to early deaths, entered the rooms of the dying, she brought with her a willingness to talk openly about death without fear. This nameless angel gave Kubler-Ross the most valuable lesson of her life, telling her, "Death is not a stranger to me. He is an old acquaintance. It takes courage to befriend death. We find that courage in life through loving." Our collective fear of death is a dis-ease of the heart. Love is the only cure. Many people approach death with despair because they realize they had not lived their lives as they wanted to. They never found their true selves, or they never found the love their hearts longed to know. Sometimes facing death, they offer themselves the love they did not offer for most of their lives. They give themselves acceptance, the unconditional love that is the core of self-love. In her foreword to Intimate Death, Marie de Hennezel describes witnessing the way approaching death can enable people to become more fully self-actualized. She writes, "At the moment of utter solitude, when the body breaks down on the edge of infinity, a separate time begins to run that cannot be measured in any normal way. In the course of several days, something happens with the help of another presence that allows despair and pain to declare themselves. The dying seize hold of their lives, take possession of them, unlock their truth. They discover the freedom of being true to themselves. This deathbed recognition of love's power is a moment of ecstasy. We would be lucky if we felt its power all our days and not just when those days are ending. When we love every day, we do not need the imminent threat of sure death to be true to ourselves. Living with awareness and clarity of mind and heart, we are able to embrace the realization of our dying in a manner that allows us to live more fully because we know death is always with us. There is no one among us who is a stranger to death. Our first home in the womb is also a grave where we await the coming of life. Our first experience of living is a moment of resurrection, a movement out of the shadows and into the light. When we watch a child physically coming out of the womb, we know we are in the presence of the miraculous. Yet it does not take long for us to forget the magical harmony of the transition from death into life, and death soon becomes the passage we want to avoid. But it has become harder for our nation to flee death. Even though, on the average, we have longer lifespans, death surrounds us now more than ever, as so many life-threatening diseases take the lives of loved ones, friends, and acquaintances, many of whom are young in years. The strong presence of dying often cannot penetrate our cultural denial that death is always among us, and people still refuse to let an awareness of death guide them. When I was a little girl, our mother talked with ease about the possibility of death. Often, when we would put off for tomorrow the things that could be done today, she would remind us that life is not promised. This was her way of urging us to live life to the fullest, to live so that we would be without regret. I'm continually surprised when friends and strangers act as though any talk of death is a sign of pessimism or morbidity. Death is among us. To see it always and only as a negative subject is to lose sight of its power to enhance every moment. Luckily, those healers and comforters who work with the dying show us how to face the reality of death so that talking about it is not taboo. Just as we are often unable to speak about our need to love and be loved because we fear our words would be interpreted as signs of weakness or failure, so are we rarely able to share our thoughts about death and dying. We wonder then that we are collectively unable to confront the significance of grief. Just as the dying are often carted off so that the process of dying will be witnessed by only a select few, grieving individuals are encouraged to let themselves go only in private, in appropriate settings, away from the rest of us. Sustained grief is particularly disturbing in a culture that offers a quick fix for any pain. Sometimes it amazes me to know intuitively that the grieving are all around us, yet we do not see any overt signs of their anguished spirits. We are taught to feel shame about grief that lingers. Like a stain on our clothes, it marks us as flawed, imperfect. To cling to grief, to desire its expression, is to be out of sync with modern life, where the hip do not get bogged down in mourning. Love knows no shame. To be loving is to be open to grief, to be touched by sorrow, even sorrow that is unending. The way we grieve is informed by whether we know love. Since loving lets us let go of so much fear, it also guides our grief. When we lose someone we love, we can grieve without shame. Given that commitment is an important aspect of love, we who love know we must sustain ties in life and death. Our mourning, our letting ourselves grieve over the loss of loved ones, is an expression of our commitment, a form of communication and communion. Knowing this and possessing the courage to claim our grief as an expression of love's passion does not make the process simple in a culture that would deny us the emotional alchemy of grief. Much of our cultural suspicion of intense grief is rooted in the fear that the unleashing of such passion will overtake us and keep us from life. However, this fear is usually misguided. In its deepest sense, grief is a burning of the heart, an intense heat that gives us solace and release. When we deny the full expression of our grief, it lays like a weight on our hearts, causing emotional pain and physical ailments. Grief is most often unrelenting when individuals are not reconciled to the reality of loss. Love invites us to grieve for the dead as ritual of mourning and celebration. As we speak our hearts in mourning, we share our intimate knowledge of the dead, of who they were and how they lived. We honor their presence by naming the legacies they leave us. They need not contain grief when we use it as a means to intensify our love for the dead and dying, for those who remain alive. Toward the end of her brilliant career, Kubler-Ross was convinced that there really is no death, only a leaving of the body to take another form. Like those who believe in an afterlife, resurrection, or reincarnation, death becomes then not an end, but a new beginning. These insights, however enlightening, do not change the fact that in death we surrender our embodied life on earth. Love is the only force that allows us to hold one another close beyond the grave. That is why knowing how to love each other is also a way of knowing how to die. When the poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning declares in her sonnet, "I shall but love thee better after death," she attests to the importance of memory and communion with our dead. When we allow our dead to be forgotten, we fall prey to the notion that the end of embodied life corresponds to the death of the spirit. In biblical scripture, the divine voice declares, "I have set before you life and death. Therefore, choose life." Embracing the spirit that lives beyond the body is one way to choose life. We embrace that spirit through rituals of remembering, through ceremonies wherein we invoke the spirit presence of our dead, and through ordinary rituals in everyday life where we keep the spirit of those we have lost close. Sometimes we invoke the dead by allowing wisdom they have shared to guide our present actions. Or we invoke through reenacting one of their habits of being. And the grief that may never leave us even as we do not allow it to overwhelm us is also a way to give homage to our dead, to hold them. In a culture like ours, where few of us seek to know perfect love, grief is often overshadowed by regret. We regret things left unsaid, things left unreconciled. Now and then, when I find myself forgetting to celebrate life, unmindful of the way embracing death can heighten and enhance the way I interact with the world, I take time to think about whether I would be at peace knowing that I left someone without saying what's in my heart, that I left with harsh words. I try daily to learn to leave folks as though we might never be meeting again. This practice makes us change how we talk and interact. It is a way to live consciously. The only way to live that life where, as Edith Piaf sings, we regret nothing, is by awakening to an awareness of the value of right livelihood and right action. Understanding that death is always with us can serve as the faithful reminder that the time to do what we feel called to do is always now and not in some distant and unimagined future. Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh teaches in Our Appointment with Life that we find our true selves by living fully in the present. To return to the present is to be in contact with life. Life can be found only in the present moment because the past no longer is and the future has not yet come. Our appointment with life is in the present moment. The place of our appointment is right here in this very place. Living in a culture that is always encouraging us to plan for the future, it is no easy task to develop the capacity to be here now. When we live fully in the present, when we acknowledge that death is always with us and not just there at the moment where we breathe our last breath, we are not devastated by events over which we have no control. Losing a job, rejection by someone we hope to connect with, the loss of a longtime friend or companion. Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us everything we seek can only be found in the present, that to abandon the present in order to look for the things in the future is to throw away the substance and hold on to the shadow. To be here does not mean that we do not make plans, but that we learn to give the making of future plans only a small amount of energy. And once future plans are made, we release our attachment to them. Sometimes it helps to write down our plans for the future and put them away, out of sight and out of mind. Accepting death with love means we embrace the reality of the unexpected, of experiences over which we have no control. Love empowers us to surrender. We do not need to have endless anxiety and worry about whether we will fulfill our goals or plans. Death is always there to remind us that our plans are transitory. By learning to love, we learn to accept change. Without change, we cannot grow. Our will to grow in spirit and truth is how we stand before life and death, ready to choose life. And that's that on that. Love you guys. See ya in the next one.